Rob Shriver, welcome to the People's Cabinet.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here with you.
So I think a lot of people are aware of what Trump is trying to do with federal employees. They read about furloughs, they read about firings. And so I want to get to what the Office of Personnel Management is and how people should be thinking about it. But the first thing I want to talk to you about is I'm sure you're hearing so many stories of people losing their jobs, of being scared about what's in their futures. And that's the most important thing for us on this podcast, is to really humanize government. So when you think about all the stories you've heard over the past few months, what's one that kind of sticks in your head?
There's a clear story for me, Dan. And you're right, like, especially in the first few months of the administration, I was talking to lots of federal workers every day. And I had this one phone call. It was on a Sunday morning, and it was a person who was in the national security space. And he, as many people in the national security space are, he had been in and out of sort of political and career roles for administrations of both parties, and had landed in a career position in the last year of the Biden administration, an important position at a really important agency. And I got in touch with him because he had received notice that he was being terminated and that he was immediately put on administrative leave. And he was instructed to meet some security personnel from the agency at a location near his home to turn in his equipment. And this is a big, tough, like, national security, former military. All he cares about is serving the country. And as he was talking about not being able to go into his office and retrieve his personal effects, he choked up. And he was worried because he had printed out his SF-86, which is a very sensitive background investigation questionnaire that many feds have to do. And so there was a printout of his SF-86 there. He had collected his official personnel records, and he wasn't even able to go back in and get his personal effects, nor was anybody going to bring those to him. And he was really upset about this. And, he was upset about, of course, losing his job. And I couldn't believe that somebody with this degree of experience and expertise that was working on something really important would just be let go like that. But for him, what really got to him is, like, I can't even go and get my most sensitive materials. And Dan, I had been, like, numb to it all because we were working so hard, and we still are. But I got off that phone and I went to my wife and I broke down a little bit there too.
So let's take a step back. You were director of the Office of Personnel Management, 2 million federal employees. Can you just give us a 1-minute overview of what the Office of Personnel Management is and what it does?
Sure thing. So OPM has about 3,000 employees. The vast majority of those actually work on the benefits programs that OPM administers for the federal government.
So it's like an HR department.
It's like an HR department for the federal government that administers benefits and sets policy. OPM doesn't do, like, the day-to-day hiring, firing, performance management, or at least it didn't in its history. It really just sort of sets the rules. It provides help to agencies, guidance, conducts audits to make sure the agencies are following the rules. And then again, like, the vast majority administer the retirement program or oversee the federal employee health benefit program, which has like 8 million covered lives in it. That's what the agency is.
And can you just elucidate for listeners what the difference is between a political and a career appointee?
Sure. So,
Employee.
Yeah, sure. So a political appointee is somebody who comes in because they are there to execute the president's agenda. They are not hired under any of the regular rules that apply to federal workers. They're hired going through a process with either the transition team or there's a special office of presidential personnel. They join the federal government with the full understanding that they serve at the pleasure of the president, can be relieved of their duties at any time for any reason, and should the country decide to elect a different president, they know that their time will be up in the federal government. Career civil servants, however, who are the vast majority of those 2 million plus federal employees, there's only a few thousand politicals. Career civil servants are hired based on merits, on their expertise. They come in to perform a specific function. They take direction from their political leaders about what their priorities are. They implement the policies of the political leaders. But really, they are there to provide that level of expertise and consistency across administrations. They become expert in their area, and they provide that expertise to inform political leaders, no matter their party, in making important decisions.
What's a clear example of a career position that would make it easy for a listener to understand, okay, like it doesn't make sense for that person to turn over every 4 years or 8 years?
Somebody who processes Social Security benefits, a wildland firefighter, somebody who inspects poultry to make sure that poultry is safe, somebody who is a scientific expert in a particular field and has studied the field, is maybe developing new innovations in the field. Those are all examples of government jobs that have traditionally been career.
Well, I remember when I was chief of staff at Labor, there's 14,000 or so employees at Labor, I think 160 appointees. And I remember walking in day one, just being completely bewildered about federal government. And there were all these career employees there who did everything, as you say, from administer HR forms to, laying out policy, things like that. And I don't know what I would have done without them. And these people have been dedicating their lives, regardless of party, to making sure that the appointees and the country is successful. And it certainly was eye-opening for me. So can you explain a little bit about what Schedule F implies? Because I think it directly is at this nexus of career versus political. We've heard this term a lot, Project 2025, but I think very few people actually know what Schedule F is. So could you break that down in layman's terms?
Yeah, so Schedule F is a technical HR tool that has the impact of moving people from career jobs into, I call them like political appointee light. And I call them that because people that are through this HR mechanism transitioned out of a regular civil service job into this Schedule F type job. They don't have the same due process protections that federal workers have. They're judged based on their ability to do what the president wants them to do. There's more loyalty, personal loyalty involved if you were a Schedule F employee. We all, as political appointees, were trained that the career civil service actually leaves its politics at home, and they're to be evaluated and hired and fired based on their merit. Schedule F completely upends this dynamic and creates this fuzziness where you have people who are being called career employees, but they're essentially treated just like politicals. And it creates a situation where they're then serving at the pleasure of the president and could be let go, for example, because the president thinks there's something in their background that they supported a cause that he doesn't agree with.
And so what's an example of a position that might become Schedule F? And I want people to understand the implications of what that would mean.
Right. So I can start with at OPM, which I'm most familiar with. So at OPM, we have career experts who understand the intricacies of the law that governs the federal workforce. And it's complicated. There's really intricate pay provisions, the leave provisions, the way that the hiring process works. We have a policy, a longstanding policy in this country that values the service of our veterans and gives them a priority in the hiring process. And so we have technical experts that make sure that that is honored. And so these are folks who are exactly in the crosshairs here to be turned into these Schedule F folks so that whatever work they're doing, say the president doesn't want to honor veterans, the people who are expert in that have to figure out how to keep the president from, how to meet that president's goal. And no longer honor veterans. And if they're not doing it up to the president's liking, even though that's what the law provides right now, then he can let them go. That's the easiest example. One of the problems, though, Dan, is that the administration has never explained how far it's going to go with this. And we have seen some evidence from the Social Security Administration that it's going to go very far. So, for example, as I mentioned, some of the people that sort of process Social Security benefits issues, resolve issues, process cases, SSA is taking the position that those should be on this new Schedule F. So you see how now you've transformed somebody who is just like executing a process under the law to administer benefits. Now, if the president wants to cut Social Security benefits and he can't get Congress to go along with that, he can just hire people, put them into this Schedule F, and hold them accountable for suppressing Social Security benefits. It's a whole other way to do an end run around Congress.
And so there's no definitive number of people that has been outlined or the implications of how widespread this could be.
No, even the Project 2025 people have been all over the map on this. Someone said 50,000, someone said 250,000. The vice president himself has said that everybody who's a career federal employee should be driven out and replaced with people who are Trump loyalists.
So can you talk about the protections that, at least up until this point, career employees had? Because if you're going to turn a position into Schedule F, in theory, there's a quote-unquote incumbent who may be in that role. I'm sure that the president could come up with some kind of purity test, but I'm sure he'd also want to get rid of a bunch of people. In addition, we've seen huge numbers of people either furloughed or outright fired throughout the government. Can you tell us what the protections or the way things previously had been under both Republican and Democrat administrations and what he has done and how he's done it?
Happy to. So the merit system that we have in place in our country dates back to the 1880s, and it came in place to replace the spoils system that previously our country operated under. And under the spoils system, basically whoever won the presidency could pick whoever they wanted for these federal jobs. And that system was proven to be corrupt, inefficient, ineffective, and actually led to the assassination of President Garfield. And so it was after that this modern merit system approach came into play. And both parties have strengthened it ever since then. The fundamental basis behind it is that once you complete a year or two of your federal service, you're presumed to be performing at an acceptable level. If the agency wants to take an action against you, it needs to be based on merit and not based on your personal political viewpoint. It can't be based on retaliating against you for whistleblowing or for reporting discrimination. It's all supposed to be based on your job performance and your conduct. And so if the agency wants to take an action against you, they provide notice of the action. You have an opportunity to respond. The agency makes its final decision. And then for lots of types of actions, if you're represented by a union, you can file a union grievance, or if not, you can file an appeal to this independent board called the Merit System Protection Board. And then that board will issue judgment. And they generally, from 80 to 90% of the cases, they uphold the agency's perspective today. All of that process would be taken away from anybody who's moved into Schedule F.
And so how is he able to do what he's doing right now? Is he targeting the people who are in their, quote, probationary period? Is that the 1 to 2 years that you alluded to?
That is what I alluded to. And he has attempted to fire en masse probationary employees. He has run into multiple legal hurdles in doing that. They've had to change their guidance, which originally came from OPM and instructed all agencies to terminate those probationary employees.
So he was just like 1 to 2 years, they have fewer protections, let's get rid of all of them to start, just as a baseline.
Correct. That was the baseline. Then from there, he moved on to trying to entice people to leave with this so-called fork in the road deferred resignation program. This is the same thing that Elon Musk did when he took over Twitter. It was a program without statutory authority. It was a program that wasn't funded at the time it was offered. It's been challenged, and that continues to be litigated in the court. So that the issue of legality has not yet been resolved. And last estimates were some 75,000 people had taken that. And who can blame them when they were being tormented day to day in their jobs and disrespected by a bunch of 20, 25-year-old Doge employees? On the heels of that were massive layoffs, and these are called reductions in force in the federal government. They happen sometimes. Federal employees understand they can happen. They typically happen because the president has worked with Congress on a budget. President has every right to try to prioritize the things that he wants to prioritize in the budget, including shrinking the government. And then following that process, there's an orderly way to determine who gets laid off and who gets to keep their job. Well, they completely disregarded all of that and just took a chainsaw, as we saw Elon Musk, to the federal workforce with not following any of those rules, with no plan for how to actually deliver the services that are required by law. And in fact, they have eliminated a lot of the offices that are statutorily required. So there are major legal challenges, and a new one filed this week about the way the president is trying to reorganize the government without Congress.
And is part of his mentality that I'm just going to do this, it may get challenged, but by the time, I may lose, it could be, months or years, and therefore I'm victorious in at least temporarily shrinking government. Is that where he's getting at it, or what?
I think it's even beyond that. I think that's a part of the strategy, but what goes hand in hand with that is he is destroying the very agencies within government that would hear those kinds of challenges. So there's a little known office called the Office of Special Counsel. This is an independent agency that's supposed to investigate retaliation against whistleblowers, Hatch Act violations, which is improper politics in the federal workplace, prohibited personnel practices, which is another kind of thing that you can't do to federal workers. Well, he fired the special counsel, and that special counsel is supposed to be appointed to a term in cross administrations. Then he fired one of the members of the Merit Systems Protection Board. So this is that agency that's little known, but it is what Congress set up to resolve these federal employee complaints. They're down to one member. They don't have a quorum. He's fired people at the EEOC, at the NLRB equivalent in the federal sector. So yes, I think the strategy is we'll make them sue us. It'll take them forever. And we're going to put our thumb on the scale on the process so that they can't even get their legal challenges heard.
And what about unions and union protections? First of all, what percentage of the civil force is supposedly protected by unions, and how is he getting around that?
There's about 50% of federal workers that are in a bargaining unit. And collective bargaining in the federal government is very different than in the private sector. Most conditions of work are set by statute, like pay and benefits. So really, the main function of federal employee unions is to help represent federal workers if they're having workplace issues, grievances. And federal unions have to represent everybody in the bargaining unit, whether they are dues-paying members or not. Congress assigned them that work. So maybe 50% of the federal workforce is in a bargaining unit. Maybe only 20%, 25% actually pay union dues, but unions have to represent all of those 50%. Now, what the president has done is he has said that collective bargaining in the federal government largely infringes on national security. And as a result, he has basically wiped out unions in the federal government with a few small exceptions.
And he can do that how?
He's done it by executive order. There is an authority that Congress gave the president that allows him to decide that certain agencies or certain functions.
And this is giving the president, President Trump, or just the power
president
has been delegated?
Yeah, any president. There's a longstanding power that the president, if he or she believes that a particular function or agency is so critical to national security that there can't be collective bargaining, they can exclude them. That has been used very sparingly and very narrowly, and usually there's a very strong case for why the president has invoked that. This time there was no showing. There was just a broad-based elimination of collective bargaining at places like the Department of Interior, for example.
And what's your reaction to this narrative of a deep state with career civil servants? When you hear that, how do you react?
I think it's so misguided, and I think it comes from people who either know they're gaslighting or have no experience working with federal workers. 85% of the federal workforce is outside of the Washington, D.C. area. Most federal workers wake up every day thinking about how they can help the constituents that is their mission to help. So Again, let's go back to an air traffic controller. I don't think the air traffic controllers wake up every morning thinking, how can I thwart the Trump administration today? I think they wake up thinking about how can I keep the skies safe. I think the person who assigns out wildland firefighter resources isn't thinking, okay, well, California didn't vote for the president, so I'm not sending any wildland firefighters there. I think they're looking at the science, the evidence, the weather, and they're deciding what the best use is of federal resources to help maximize saving life and saving property. The examples go on and on and on. And so, again, I just find it either completely gaslighting or completely ignorant of who federal workers are and what they do day to day.
And what's the alternative vision? What should we be doing right now instead? If there were a President Harris or even another Republican president who believed in career civil servants in the way that other Republican presidents have, what should we be doing right now?
Yeah, I love to talk about this, Dan, because going back to the status quo is not the answer. I've been in government in multiple jobs over almost 10 years, and I love government workers, and I think the agencies work really hard to deliver on their missions, but things were not perfect. We need reforms, and I think we need customer-centric reforms that are focused on how can the federal government most efficiently and effectively deliver services to the American people. I think a lot of American people don't even understand the impact that the federal government has on their lives because it's not visible to them. I think that we could do so much better at being like state of the art when it comes to customer service, at being transparent when it comes to data. The federal government has so much data. It could be used in a way that was effective for the economy and transparent if done correctly with appropriate privacy protection, cybersecurity. So I think there's so much more we could do to help every American and for communities across the country to see what that impact is. And we have built up so many different layers of bureaucracy over the years, meaning process, not people, but process, as a result, frankly, of congressional oversight. You've worked in government too. Somebody's boss gets called up to testify on the Hill and they have a really bad hearing because something happened at the agency, and they come back and say to the career folks, don't ever let that happen again. Well, what's the career folks' answer? I'm going to create a process to protect against this. So much is so conservative and risk averse in the government. That's more of the culture. It's not a political culture. It's that people want to make sure that they keep their bosses out of trouble. So we need to address that so that the government acts more nimbly, more efficient, and that everyday Americans see the results.
And I think that a lot of people can understand implications of what this long-term damage-wise will do, right? You have reductions in inspectors, other career functions, and in an ideal world, you're hiring more of them. Now you're starting with a bigger hole, and that's going to take time. Morale being low doesn't result in an employee potentially be meeting their potential because of morale being low. In the future, I'm not sure why anyone. I hope that they would, but right now it feels like most people would probably look elsewhere than go to the federal government because of their concern about job security. Federal hiring and employee dynamics better than anyone. What's something that keeps you up at night that maybe most people won't think through that may be a effect of what we're seeing right now?
Cybersecurity. So when I was at OPM, I did a lot of work with the Office of the National Cyber Director. And what I learned in working with my friend Harry Coker is that there is a labor market-wide shortage of cyber talent. And so he was very focused on how to grow the pool of cyber talent. That shortage has affected the federal government, and we were working very hard to bring new cyber talent into the federal government in order to keep up with the hackers, with the international threats. You know what those cyber workers do? They mostly work remote. They mostly work from home. That's just the way the industry is. You know what else? Those cyber workers get paid a lot more in the private sector than they do in the federal government. Now we have a dynamic where federal employees are being demonized. There's efforts on the Hill to take away retirement benefits. The efforts to cut federal salary and certainly not pay more money, and to make everybody come to the office 5 days a week. I'm aware of how serious the cybersecurity threats are. OPM lived through a terrible breach in 2015 that it took years for the agency to recover from. And the administration is totally disregarding that. They have DOJ people that are violating cybersecurity principles left and right. And I am really concerned about how we are weakening the U.S. government's cyber posture and opening ourselves up to attack.
And what was the breach? What was the nature of the breach in 2015? And does that open us up again now to something
The
similar?
Chinese government hacked into sensitive personnel information of all of the federal employees. OPM had worked hard over the intervening years to bolster its cybersecurity posture. The chief information officer team won awards for all of the work that they had done to try to win back credibility from the American public. And with all of that dissipating, I'm just highly concerned about not only accessing the OPM data, but health information, national security information. We just don't know everything that DOJ is doing. But what we do know is there's a brain drain in the federal government, and that's going to affect cyber.
So my final question to you is, what's your message to listeners who want to help re-engage people in their communities, maybe give them a little bit of hope that you should continue to participate in civic life and that government isn't broken completely?
I think that every American should demand excellence from the government, no matter who is in charge. It's taxpayer dollars that fund the government. Government workers should be held to a very high standard. What I have seen is that government workers largely live up to those standards. They take those responsibilities seriously. But I think we can all rally behind that idea that our government should be responsive to the American people. It should be delivering results. It should be effective. It should be efficient. We can all agree on that. What's happening now is making it so much worse. And the sad thing is the American people are going to start feeling that in local communities. They're going to understand for the first time why a functioning federal government is important to their day-to-day lives. And I think we should all rally together around that and demand that that get fixed. It shouldn't matter what your politics are, who you voted for. We should all be able to agree that we expect the federal government to support our society, to provide the services that we need efficiently and effectively. And I think that we need to be telling the stories. So as people are coming across the impact of these cuts in their communities, they need to be sharing that. They need to be sharing that with each other. They need to be sharing it with their members of Congress. They need to be sharing it with the media. We need to tell this story so that everybody understands that the things that are happening in Washington affect, again, 85% of those 2.2 million employees are outside of Washington. And those people are all doing work in local communities that's important, and that the absence of that is going to be noted. So I am optimistic that our country is starting to understand that a little better. I don't think necessarily that, people who have been supporters of the civil service like me over a career have done the best job of educating the American public. So this is an opportunity to do that and to rally with each other in support of, we need a functioning government that's going to be responsive to the American people.
And what's the most hyper-local example or examples of people in their communities they may have not realized or appreciated were federal employees that might be affected right now?
There is an office from the U.S. Department of Agriculture in every county in the country, and there is people that help farmers day in and day out. They help them access the benefits that are available to them. They help them with financing. They're a one-stop shop for farmers to come in. That's one example. Of course, like every day that you go to the grocery store and you purchase food, you want that food to be safe. And that food is largely safe in this country because of a huge federal network of food safety inspectors and people that go to the plants, people that are working with the animals. Like all of that stuff is conducted under federal oversight to make sure that the food supply stays safe. Air traffic control is another example. I think people do know more about that.
And some of the things that have happened in the first few months of this administration have been alarming, as there have been cuts at the FAA. There's been several well-publicized air traffic incidents that are quite scary. So anytime you're traveling, that also accounts for the interstate system and the support that the federal government provides there. So these are, I could keep going, Dan, but these are some examples that immediately come to mind.
Rob Shriver, thank you for coming on the People's Cabinet.
My pleasure, Dan. Thanks so much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the People's Cabinet. If you did, please like, subscribe, ring that bell, and put in the comments below who else you'd like to see sworn in. And stay tuned for new episodes every Tuesday. Let's go.